I'm Rebecca St. George. I'm the task force facilitator, and I'll let the rest of you introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm John DeSanto. I'm a district court judge for 6th Judicial District, which includes St. Louis County, which is where our project is focused.
I'm Dan Bartlett, excuse me, unit supervisor, probation and parole for St. Louis County.
Good morning, Donna Ennis. I'm a community rep here today.
Good morning, I'm Fred Friedman. I'm the Chief Public Defender up in northeastern Minnesota and also a professor at the University of Minnesota.
Good morning, my name is Mark Rubin. I'm the St. Louis County Attorney at the northern part of Minnesota.
That's tomorrow's. Okay. You know what? I'll just go. We don't need that, right?
Are you sure?
Yeah.
It takes
No, I got it right here, so I got my notes. We're good. You don't need pictures, do you? If you need more entertainment, these guys will dance a little bit. We do that at every meeting. It kind of keeps things going. It's really fun. Do you? Okay. So it's kind of a special Minnesota dance. It's good. So when we started last year, when we were here last year, we had a slightly different composition, but not entirely different. I think John and Fred and Donna and I were all here. Dan is new with the probation department, and Mark is new because the woman who initially applied for this grant, he beat her in an election. And so we kind of had to shake things up a little bit, and it didn't slow us down, not at all. We kept moving, but you know, we got there. So early on, we decided almost immediately to look at racial disparities in terms of pretrial release. What are we doing with bail? What are we doing with detention? How are we sort of seeing these disparities? We sort of knew anecdotally that our jails were full of people in pretrial, that they were full of brown people in pretrial. In northern Minnesota, what that means is a lot of African Americans and a lot of Native Americans. So that was sort of where we focused our attention. And also looking at conditions of pretrial release. Initially, we decided we're going to look at every single case in the St. Louis County Attorney's Office that they charge, breakdown by crime, race, gender, courthouse, there's 3 courthouses in St. Louis County, and conditions of release. We're looking at sentencing departures by race and secure detentions for adults. That's kind of a lot, but we were going to look at all of it. We had ideas that it was going to be pretty easy to get all those statistics, and we'd have them in a meeting or two, and then we'd look at them, and we'd figure out our reform and carry on, and it turned out not to be so easy. It turned out getting those numbers and getting those statistics was, would it be fair to say, a nightmare, maybe? Yeah?
Harder than it should have.
Yes, I'm learning how to use this sort of diplomatic language. It was an effing nightmare. And so it took some doing and it took some working, and then, on top of that we had the new county attorney, and so how do we adjust into that and work with that, and it slowed us down just like that much. And then Fred suggested that we hire contract with a guy named Dr. Rod Widener to do some statistical analysis, to pull the stuff. And Dr. Widener is, what is he exactly, Fred?
He's a sociologist at the University of Minnesota Duluth.
He's a sociologist at the University of Minnesota Duluth. He focuses on criminal justice. And he was kind of amazing. He was able to go in and work with the court administrators and find numbers that we could not otherwise find. He put together a couple of fairly significant reports. He initially went into it looking at whether differences in judges' release decisions are related to defendants' self-reported race, and whether the St. Louis County Courthouse, where a defendant first appears, is related to judges' release decisions. Because one of our hypotheses going into it was that the northern courthouses had different sort of effects on pretrial decision-making than the southern courthouses, understanding that Duluth is considered southern in this analysis, which a lot of you might not see that. So he started pulling the numbers. Preliminarily, what he found was that white defendants were at least twice as likely to be released on their own recognizance as defendants of color, which is statistically a pretty significant piece of the puzzle. On the other hand, he found that whites were also about 3 times as likely to be detained pre-trial as people of color. So it wasn't super clean or super clear what we were looking at or what that meant. We also found that mean bail amounts were lowest for American Indian defendants, but they were highest for African American defendants, significantly. That white defendants were somewhere on the low end, and so those numbers were all sort of brought up all kinds of things. The courthouse differences, Duluth and Virginia were closer as far as releasing on their own recognizance and having whites a lot more likely. Hibbing, there was a difference, but it was sort of statistically insignificant. That's sort of new for me. I never took statistics. That's been a eye-opening to find out how complicated that can be. So, in a nutshell, there were a lot of sort of close or not so close or in between and trying to figure out, but in fact, people of color are being detained. They're less likely to be released on their own recognizance. We're looking at what are the conditions of release, that seems to be different. We're still collecting more data as we go. You look like you want to say something. I think you should. Are you sure? All right. And so we've got a lot more that John's going to talk about tomorrow that we're doing with this. I don't want to take a lot of time because our 10-minute thing, but all right. Do you guys have anything you want to throw in with that?
The only thing I think to add is because our county, we mentioned it last time, we're far and away, not even close, the largest county east of the Mississippi. It's 193 miles from one end of our county to our others. Our county is considerably larger than the state of Delaware.
Yes, at least 3 times.
So that means that we have people in custody that are an hour and a half by car from the courts they're supposed to go to, and from their lawyers, and from their corrections agents. Because the jail is down in Duluth, and we have courts every day in Duluth, and 60 miles to the north in Virginia, and about 83 miles to the northwest in Hibbing. All within the same county. It'd be like Brooklyn going to Philadelphia to see their clients.
One of the things that happened on their task force, they had Robin Wojciechowski.
Wojciechowski, just like it's spelled.
She runs the jail, and she mentioned that the detention of pretrial detainees has resulted in their county jail being overwrought, and they have to pay to house pretrial detainees in other neighboring counties. So it's having an economic impact. And so this reform, even though we believe it should be done because of racial disparity, it may very well be more successfully marketed as a cost-saving gesture if we can figure out a way to identify the people who are not at risk of flight or rearrest for danger to the community, if they can be released and reduce that pretrial detention population.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Did your statistics take into account the severity of crime?
Yes. Yeah, he was amazing. It was severity of crime, where it took place, who the defendants were. We're mostly looking just at felonies and gross misdemeanors. Potentially that's all we're looking at, just to narrow it. Like somewhere in here, if you go too broad, you never get anything done. And so we're sort of narrowed it down to the more serious crimes. Violent crimes is sort of drug crimes, that kind of thing.
Is bail set on almost every one of these?
I'm sorry?
On the felonies, is bail usually always set?
I think that,
Yes,
Misdemeanors as well?
yes.
By law.
Well, I mean, or they could be released on their own recognizance, but felony cases, the ones we're dealing on, yes.
You don't
What you think,
know
yeah.
ROR any felonies?
And that's actually part of what we're looking into as far as this, the issues of disparity.
and one of the more sort of exciting conversations that we have occasionally recently is the role of commercial bondsmen with this bail thing, and how much are we keeping people in jail because they're poor or because they're brown instead of because they're dangerous or at risk of flight. And so that's sort of a big issue we're looking at. Yeah?
The PowerPoint presentation that you
Didn't do? It's in here. I've got some of the numbers, and we actually, you could probably have access to the whole report that Dr. Weidner did. It's quite good. I mean, you
We
know.
have some information on each of the pre-conference reports in your materials. You have a PowerPoint slide presentation in your conference materials that Sam will put together that summarizes the pre-conference reports each of you submitted.
Yeah, and the report that Dr. Weidner did talks all about the tools he used and what, I can't think of the language. It's really, if I could think of it, I'd sound super smart, but it's, oh, go on. But,
Well, in Minnesota, there is a law, is it Rule 6, that requires bail, a monetary bail to be imposed on everyone who's not released on, with conditions on their own recovery.
Correct, right. If they're not released on their own recognizance, they're entitled, they're required to have a bail setting. And we have a rule that gives the court all of these different things that the court needs to consider. So what we've been trying to do is figure out how do we have the court consider those factors with recognition of the biases that we may have, that the court may have in setting those amounts.
Now, one of the things that they're going to do this afternoon is meet with the DC Pretrial Services Agency. They have a validated risk assessment tool, and I understand you guys are working on
Yes.
implementing a validated
We
risk
have
assessment tool.
implemented one.
And the Pretrial Justice Institute that nationally advocates bail reform, fight against bail bondsmen, and all those kinds of things. So again, we're making smart decisions that have a cost savings and hopefully also reduces the racial impact.
well, we'll talk about that tomorrow, what we're going to do. Go ahead.
Depending on which one, whatever you call it. And when they're arrested, is there an intake, like when they go and someone will fill out like where they live, how long do you have an agency that does that? And then
Yes. Probation does that.
But not before court.
not before-
Your question was before court, I think.
At ours before.
Yeah, and-
All factors are looked into, contact all those contacts, like let's say 10 factors, if he makes all those. Even
You
if
have time to do that.
In the middle 70s, we had exactly what you're describing, and the funding was cut, I'm talking almost 40 years ago now, 38 years ago, and it was never replaced. We had a great program where corrections would come 5, 6 in the morning and have all that stuff for court. Right, but money and the burdens of remote, far distance courtrooms.
So one of the things that Kay Arola, who is Dan's supervisor, we sent them, as well as the folks from New Orleans, to the NAPSA conference, National Association of Pretrial Services Agencies, and John
I went.
as well.
It was
to-
marvelous.
To basically see what other jurisdictions are doing, particularly rural jurisdictions like yours, so you can see, is there a way that they do what we're talking about that make it work for that kind of a scenario? We learned early on at our last conference that what might work in Brooklyn might not work in New Orleans, might not work in Minnesota. So we don't want to try to do a one-size-fits-all. We want to make sure something works for this particular jurisdiction.
Do you have any rules, like, as long as, like, pre-arrangement into when they get, like, 24 hours?
Yes,
48 hours?
we have a 36-hour rule in this. It's statutory.
And 48 hours, of course, is constitutional.
Yeah, that's
Probable for the probable cause determination.